The story begins with Melissa, who is a reserved teenager living with her mother, Daria, and her frail grandmother, Elvira. Elvira is a lifelong smoker who, even in her current struggles with chronic health problems, still shares a much stronger bond with Melissa than the girl ever does with her mother. In the meantime, Melissa has just been invited to a house party hosted by Daniele, the wealthiest and most admired boy in her school. She's secretly crushed on the boy, and she couldn't resist attending, so she goes with her friend Manuela. When they arrived, Melissa kept to herself, as she felt too timid to approach Daniele. However, when she goes to the pool to have a dip, one of the boys playfully pulls her into the pool, unaware that she cannot swim. As she starts to struggle, Daniele rushes in to save her, pulling her to safety. Then, he invites her to join him in a secluded part of the property that has a clear view of the sea. There they talk, and Melissa reveals that her father works abroad as an engineer. However, the boy senses that she has feelings for him, and he decides to exploit her vulnerability. So with a promise of a kiss, he coerces her to go down on him, only to abandon her coldly afterward, leaving Melissa feeling violated. Months later, Melissa continues to harbor feelings for him, despite his complete indifference towards her, and when the new school term begins, she attempts again to gain his attention, only to be ignored repeatedly. Then one evening, she and Manuela visit a bar where Daniele and his friends frequently hang out. This time, he acknowledges her and even introduces her to his friends. Overjoyed by his recognition, Melissa follows him to his house, and there, he seduces her once more, and in the heat of the moment, she confesses her love. But instead of reciprocating, Daniele only laughs it off as he cruelly dismisses her feelings before leaving her alone once again. This repeated rejection totally shatters Melissa's emotional state, and the heartbreak eventually marks a turning point for her as she decides to shed her innocence and adopt a hardened outlook on life. So, she resolves to take after Danielle's callous worldview, seeking physical pleasure without emotional attachments and ensuring that others are hurt before they have the chance to hurt her. But in the middle of this personal turmoil, her home life also begins to break as Elvira's health deteriorates further, forcing the family to make the difficult decision of moving her into a nursing home. For Melissa, the separation is devastating, as her grandmother has always been the only source of genuine comfort and connection. The day she and Daria drop Elvira off, Melissa feels a deep void settling in, and the already fragile relationship between mother and daughter grows even more distant. When they return home, Daria tries to liven up the mood for her daughter, but Melissa shuts her out and retreats to her room. And gradually Melissa's life begins to change as she becomes hardened by the betrayal and emotional loss. She chose to commit to changing herself entirely while abandoning the soft, caring girl she once was, and becoming someone capable of inflicting pain, just like Daniele. So, Melissa continues down a dark path of her transformation, as she is determined to prove she is no longer the naive girl she once was. One day at a cafe with her friend Manuela, she begins gesturing suggestively to a stranger sitting across the room. When the man finally approaches them to initiate a conversation, Melissa abruptly stands and walks away, using the encounter to demonstrate to Manuela how much she has changed. During Christmas that year, Elvira visited them, and she immediately sensed that something was wrong with Melissa, especially after seeing the unrest in Melissa's behavior. So, she quietly warns Daria that something is deeply wrong, but Daria dismisses her concerns, believing it's just a phase for the young girl. Days later, Melissa receives a call from Daniele, and despite everything, her teenage eagerness kicks in, and she agrees to visit his home when he promises that he has a surprise for her. Once she arrives, Daniele begins seducing her and then asks her to close her eyes. Then, out of the shadows, one of his friends enters the room and joins in, and it becomes clear they intended to be intimate with her together. Shocked at first, Melissa prepares to leave, but then, in a moment to prove to them that she can be in charge, she returns and goes through with it, determined to prove that nothing affects her anymore. When she tells Manuela about her encounter with Daniele and his friend, Manuela tries to warn her of the dangers associated with such reckless behavior, as she also makes Melissa make a promise that she won't engage in any of such dangerous adventures in the future. But Melissa ignores her pleas altogether. The next day, Melissa visits a museum with other students from her school, and inside, she meets with one of the guards. And again, she decides to explore her boundaries as she goes to a corner of the building with him and engages in intimacy, showing just how far she's willing to go to maintain her new personality. Her secret life is eventually exposed when a classmate discovers her diary and reads it aloud to the entire class. The notes reveal her explicit encounters and also talks about Melissa's deepest secrets. Feeling humiliated, Melissa eventually snatches back the diary and, in a fit of anger, accuses Manuela of betraying her. In truth, Melissa had written unkind things about Manuela in the diary, and this deeply hurt her only true friend. And from there on, their friendship shatters. Now fully embracing her provocative new image, Melissa changes her appearance and behavior, as she starts dressing in revealing clothes and keeping her distance from Manuela. Even when her friend tries one last time to reconnect, Melissa refuses to speak to her. Meanwhile, one of the boys in her class named Marco, who has always admired Melissa from afar, finally musters the courage to approach her when he sees her dancing to music from her headphones. But before he can speak, Melissa receives another call from Daniele. However, when she arrives at the location she is supposed to meet with him, she finds that it was his friend Arnaldo who shows up instead. And without any explanation, he blindfolds her and leads her into a basement, where 4 other boys are already waiting. She could only manage to see part of the people in front of her through her blindfold, and the moment she sees them, she realizes what's about to happen. But despite the disturbing setup, Melissa goes along with them. The following day, the scandal spreads rapidly across the school, and it totally erases what little reputation Melissa had left. Whispers follow her through the halls, and the weight of constant judgmental glances drives her further into isolation. But she is no longer concerned with public opinion. So, she creates a profile on a dating site where she begins chatting with strangers. Among them, one man quickly gains her attention, and when he invites her to a hotel and promises to fulfill her fantasy, she agrees to meet with him. Meanwhile, at home, Daria receives an urgent call from the nursing home that Elvira's condition has taken a critical turn. When she goes to Melissa's room to inform her, she finds it empty. But her gaze fell on Melissa's diary on the bed, and out of impulse, she decided to read it. At the nursing home, while waiting for updates, she opened the diary only to discover details that shook her to the core. The diary reveals the depth of Melissa's hidden life, her secret struggles, and how low she had stooped. Overcome with sorrow, Daria is still processing the revelations when she is told that Elvira has passed away. Now totally devastated, she collapses in grief. About that same time, Melissa arrives at the hotel. Inside the room, she finds several boxes with outfits laid out for her. So she puts them on, but when the man arrives, he is displeased with how she is wearing the fetish clothes. But even at that, he reveals his true intentions that the fantasy he had envisioned involves using a whip. Initially, Melissa plays along, as she was in control, but the situation soon turns, and when the man grows violent and starts to hit with increasing force, Melissa is left terrified and eventually manages to escape from the room. When she finally returns home, she finds her mother waiting in her room. Daria informs her of her grandmother's death, and Melissa breaks down in tears. That is when Daria notices her daughter's clothes, and she quickly pieces together what must have happened. Then she shows Melissa the diary and gently asks if everything inside is true. When Melissa confirms it, both mother and daughter collapse into tears. And for the first time in years, they cry together. Daria apologizes, as she realized how blind she had been to Melissa's pain. She then promises to be more present and assures her daughter that she will always have her to turn to. Over time, Melissa begins to heal and slowly returns to her former self. And on the final day of school, she visits Manuela's house to mend their friendship, and the two ride their bikes together to school with their conversation filled with laughter. When they arrive at school, they see Arnaldo confronting Daniele after discovering he has been secretly involved with his girlfriend. And in the heat of the moment, Arnaldo slaps him. But as the confrontation unfolds, Melissa and Manuela walk past, and when Daniele tries to talk to Melissa, this time, she refuses to acknowledge him and walks away. When she eventually goes to check their final results, she learns that Daniele and Arnaldo fail, and Marco as well. However, when Marco arrives, he tells her that he had never been interested in school, and that he is already transferring to an art school where his passion has always been. He then shows her a notebook filled with sketches, many of which are of Melissa. Finally, he tells her that he had always loved Melissa from the first day he saw her. Touched by his words and the drawings, Melissa agrees to pose for one final sketch, and after he finishes, she hugs him, and Marco quietly takes his leave. Eventually, Daniele once again invites Melissa to a party at his house, and though she initially refuses, she later changes her mind and takes Manuela along. When they arrive, Melissa quickly notices that Daniele and his friends are heavily intoxicated and that their behavior is incoherent. However, she is unwilling to join in, so she quietly slips away to the backyard. And there, in an unexpected move, she dives into the sea despite the warnings of others. But this time, she swims out into the open water as she displays her newfound courage and embraces the moment with a sense of freedom she had long been denied. Months later, the movie ends at Elvira's graveside, where Melissa and her mother pay a visit. As they place flowers on the headstone, they embrace tightly, and in that quiet moment, it becomes clear that their broken bond has been mended, marking the beginning of a renewed and stronger relationship between mother and daughter. And that's the story of the movie Melissa P. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment for us. Until next time, stay safe.